we need to see what our application is doing at the beginning to set things up. So let's open the start method in our main file. This is a typical sequence of steps our application begins to execute inside the main method, where we call launch method of JavaFX application class. So our main class is inheriting from JavaFX application. JavaFX application thread is created for us, and then Java Runtime invokes the start method. This is where we construct our objects and make all preparation steps to configure and display the windows. This is my main window fxml file, so I construct fxml loader and pass the name of it as a resource to load. Then we call load method of fxml loader, which returns back the root entry point into our graphical user interface scene. So we construct the scene with this root, and part of the load process, the controller for this window is constructed. And so we just call loader get controller to get the controller reference. So now we have reference to our controller. The next step is that we construct our business object and call controller set the model. So let's see what we do inside the main window controller. So if you recall from our overview of fxml, we constructed 5 labels inside the main window, and these are our fx IDs, right? So it's resolution 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So having individual references like this is kind of hard to work with. So in order to overcome this hard-coded set of references, I create an array of labels. In fact, it's an array of references to these labels, and initialize it by creating an array object. And of course, I know that I have these 5 labels that I need to keep track of. So once the controller is constructed inside the fxml loader load method, the next step is that fxml loader invokes the method named initialize. So this is initialize method of our controller. So by this time, all of these objects are already created, and the references are populated with the proper addresses of objects in memory, and of course the array of label references is also fully constructed. So now what we do here in the initialize, we just simply assign each of these references, label resolution 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to the elements of this array of references to labels. And I print this message just for the debugging purposes. You can see in my output, actually this is where it gets displayed at the very beginning. So this happens when the controller is already fully constructed, and then the initialize method is invoked. The set model method is invoked from our start method right here. We want to make sure that our controller has access to the data object. And so here in set model, the first thing that we do, we just remember the reference to the business object. You can see I just added this private reference to our data object right here. And then what we do is that we call add listener, and the listener itself is defined by this lone lambda expression, which starts right here with an opening brace and ends with this closing brace. So this is a type of lambda expression which is made up of a set of statements. And so we call our data object and we get the reference to our unconfirmed resolutions, which we're supposed to display in our main window. Then we already know we have an array of labels, so we just create this very basic loop for each label. We know the index is from 0 to the length, or actually 1 less than the length of these labels. And we check the size of the resolution list. So if this label is supposed to display something, we just set text and get it from the resolutions array. Otherwise, we just set the label to display the blank string. And again, for debugging, I just display this message, and in my output window, you can see that we have this labels initialized, and then new year resolutions controller set model is complete. So this entire Lambda function that gets captured by our addListener call is stored as an element inside this array of listeners of our NYRData class. And later on, when NYRData notify observers method is invoked, we loop through each of these listeners. If we have multiple listeners, they all will be invoked, and execute onChange, which basically invokes this code, right? So this gets executed during NYRData notify observers loop for each of these listeners. And let's just be clear, this Lambda expression is not executed here inside the setModel method. Rather, it gets captured in the listeners array, and then it becomes available through this onChange method of the functional interface that we defined here. So it will execute later on when somebody calls notify observers. In fact, the next thing that happens here after setModel, we set the title for our main window, we set the scene, and we call immediately notify observers because we want to make this initial set of New Year resolutions visible from the very beginning. And then we call show. And the next sequence is just very similar. We again create new fxml loader, but this time for the history window. I call load, I create the scene, I get reference to the history controller, but I really don't do much with history window right now. We just give it a title and make it visible as well. Finally, implementation of the button click handlers is quite trivial. What we do here is just on click done, we call confirm to take care of one of the resolutions, and on click oops, we just call the corresponding method in our data object. And also when I call inside the start method, when I invoke controller notify observers, I simply delegate this call to our data object. So I added this method notify observers also to my main window controller, which delegates the call to the data object.